Good evening, and welcome to a podcast in our series titled Past, Present, and Future, Perspectives on Mental Health in the Black Community. This initiative consists of a series of podcasts, forums, and healing circles over a 6-month period that seek to expose the negative stigma associated with mental health, encourage open and honest discussions among men, women, and youth, and provide tangible solutions toward healing and recovery. We want to show our appreciation to the City of Toronto for the support to this worthy endeavor. Now, while the intention of this podcast is to create an environment of knowledge sharing, positive affirmations, and space for joy, some content may be emotionally triggering and of a sensitive nature. This episode of the podcast features content related to issues relating to mental health in the Black community, which may be emotionally triggering for some. If you or someone you know is triggered by this content or is experiencing a mental health concern, including having thoughts of suicide, support is available. Immediate telephone support is accessible by calling 211 or 1-855-310-2673. You can speak with a crisis worker at any time. Children and youth can also access 24/7 telephone support by contacting the Black Youth Helpline at 416-285-9944. For immediate emergency support, please call 911. All services are free and can be accessed confidentially. I am your host, Richard Lambie, and it is a pleasure to welcome you to this important podcast. This podcast is going to be titled Intergenerational Psychological Legacy of Trauma Through a Canadian Black Lens. In this podcast, we will explore one's understanding of trauma and stress and how it has been psychologically passed down intergenerationally through the experiences of slavery, colonialism, Jim Crow, Great Migration, and the welfare. The discussion also seeks to understand the concepts of intergenerational trauma and its effects on life for many African Canadians. Join our inaugural focus group session on Wednesday, June 29th at 5 p.m. Make your voice heard. Tell us what you think. What do we as a community need to do to address Black mental health? What are we doing well? What needs to change? We want to hear from you. Today, I would like to introduce you to Ms. Crystal Meek. Now, Crystal Meek is a registered psychotherapist, public speaker, and an advocate who, for over 15 years of experience, has been working with diverse communities to promote mental health care and wellness. She is passionate about quality mental health support for the Black community and addressing trauma through a social justice and cultural framework. Crystal continues to work with diverse communities while specializing in trauma, anxiety, depression within her private practice called Therapy Avenue. More information about services offered can be found at therapyavenue.ca. And Crystal, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
All right, that's great. We're glad to have you as well. So I'd like to start this conversation by asking you to tell me a little bit more about your practice as a psychotherapist, what your specialty is, and what are some of the mental health challenges you are seeing from members of the Black community?
Yes, thank you. It's a great question. So I run my therapy practice, most days of the week. And my demographics are mostly colored individuals or racialized individuals, or individuals from diverse communities or minority communities, including LGBTQ community, and as well as just many different types of adults. I work with adults mostly. In terms of my what I'm seeing as a reflection from my clients is really many of my clients are young professionals or, middle-aged people or some elderly people, but mostly young professionals. And most of them have parents who immigrated to Canada in some way, normally via either, just want to say immigrated in some way. And so a lot of them are first or second generation of immigrant parents. And what I'm really noticing now is a profound acknowledgement of mental health and how important mental health is, especially to the Black community, and also the effects of different. The Black community is not monolithic, so different effects of different stories, right? So there might be some individuals who have gone through genocides that I work with, and some individuals who have experienced deep oppression, some individuals who have grandparents or great grandparents who are enslaved. And so really looking at the generational the intergenerational or transgenerational effects of trauma is really important to the Black community. Not everybody's story is the same, but there is some prevalent, concerns to address.
Okay, that's great. Thanks so much for that answer. Now, not everyone is going to be familiar with the term intergenerational trauma. So,
Mm-hmm.
for those who aren't aware, could you explain the term? Is it real? And how does it occur?
Yes, that's a great question. So, intergenerational trauma, or some call it transgenerational trauma. Well, let's start off with what trauma is first. Let's define that, and then we'll go to what intergenerational and transgenerational trauma would be. So, trauma, simply put, is this one's experience of an event or a series of events that deeply impact an individual's psychological well-being or emotional well-being. So it's really how we're interpreting the world around us or the experience that we've had. And when it's interpreted negatively or seemingly dangerous to us in some perceived way, then it can become a traumatic event. The reason why I describe it that way is because the trauma and the way we are informed about trauma is really important to understand how some people may experience. Let's say there's two people. Let's put it this way: if there's two people, let's say that both are in a car accident, one person might walk away from that car accident and say, "Oh man, that was tough, but I'm okay." And another person might be extremely deeply affected and might need to take some extended time off of work to deal with the physical, but also the emotional ramifications of that. And that is because of the perceived sense of danger. So now when we look at intergenerational and transgenerational or transgenerational trauma, this has been studied through many different lenses, whether it be a sociological lens or a biological lens, and many other as well, definitely a psychological lens. This describes the passing down of trauma through generations. There's been a lot of great and new studies on using epigenetic studies or epigenetic theories to explain the passing down of trauma. So epigenes is really an interesting way to look at transgenerational or intergenerational trauma. Epigenes describe the process that kind of can take place, or I should say epigenetic trauma describes the process that can take place when an individual experiences trauma. The genes, their own genealogical makeup is not changed, but it can be affected by chemicals, and this is called the epigenes. So these are chemicals that kind of attach to the gene, and what ends up happening is they affect how a gene is expressed. So what this means is, let's say if somebody experienced a deep trauma or any trauma, and let's say they then go on to have offspring, those offspring might be more sensitive or have a higher prevalence of being sensitive to other traumas, or also including autoimmune diseases, chronic disease, anxiety, depression, and as well as more susceptible to the experience of trauma. So yeah,
Well,
so
are you saying, so excuse me, sorry to interrupt. Are you saying that it's genetic then?
So it can be, there's new studies, they're not definitive, but they have found very high correlations of studies that that do suggest that we can pass down trauma genetically. And now it's important to know that the genes themselves do not change. It's the expression of the gene. So it's what is coming along with the gene that is being a little bit manipulated in a sense. So yeah, it's the studies, the epigenetic studies are in their infancy compared to other studies, right? But there's very strong correlations. They, many studies have looked at, I should say, in order to figure this out and really do some deep research here, many studies have looked at a few different groups of people to really hone in on this, such as individuals who have experienced deep oppression, such as the Black community has actually been studied. Also, individuals who survived the Holocaust have been studied. Individuals who have survived through the Khmer Rouge killings in Cambodia, as well as Rwandan genocide, as well as First Nations individuals. And what they found in all of these groups is a very big correlation between high levels of stress within the community and higher than average levels of, again, anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress in the survivors' children.
Okay, that is very, very interesting. We're speaking with Crystal Meek, who is a professional psychotherapist. Her practice is Therapy Avenue. So let's look at when we initially spoke, you described a very interesting take on the state of the Black community that I think really has very important implications for this discussion we're having right now. You said that our community is now transitioning from surviving to thriving.
Yeah.
Please tell me what you mean by that.
Yes. So what's happened, what I tend to be seeing now is, I'm beginning to see individuals who are coming into my office and they're saying, you know what, Crystal, my parents did it one way. My parents, taught me to just put my head down and push through, do the hard work, and so essentially survive. But now they're finding they're in their job and they're thinking, you know what, I want to do more than survive. I want to do more than, I want to be able to speak up. I want to be able to thrive. I want to be able to point out to my coworkers or, in different environments, maybe in the relationship, I want to be able to point out things that need to be worked on in order to make the community around them and the environment around them safer, psychologically and emotionally. And that is the difference between surviving and thriving. We're having, when much of the Black community are children of immigrants or maybe immigrants themselves who have immigrated or migrated here. And it was a different life then to start off in a new place, to kind of put your head down, do the work, get the work that you can get, work a whole lot of jobs sometimes, and really help set up they're really just doing this to really help set up their children and give a better chance of a better future. And now we have this next generation who's saying, well, you know what, I'm really grateful for that. But at this point, I realize I'm noticing that there's a lot of trauma that's happened to my family, a lot of trauma that my family has survived through, and they're looking to heal it now. And that is when we get into thriving, right? How do we work towards healing? How do we actually really, what we're doing is healing those epigenetic genes and really working through these deep traumas that have happened to our community and to our families and as an individual, and moving into thriving.
I mean, this is such an interesting concept, especially because of the fact that our podcast series is not just looking at things happening in the past, but it's looking at where we are now, the present, and it's also seeking to address the future. And I like this concept because it's also telling us we can't just sit in the past. We have to move forward. We have to look forward. And it's encouraging to hear what what you're seeing in your practice with persons, and the fact that, all isn't lost. There is something that we can, that is happening, that we're
Yes.
doing, that we are moving forward.
Yes. And I'd mention what is so heartwarming and encouraging to see is that my clients, they work so hard and they do such hard work on really being brave and addressing traumas and concerns and mental health concerns, as well as going through life transitions. And as they begin to really build a more robust vocabulary of for mental health, and they begin to really look for opportunities to grow within their mental health and opportunities to heal within their mental health, they always report back that they've started to notice changes in their entire family. And this is really important, because what this really signifies is, not everybody has the ability to come to private therapy, or is able to access certain types of materials. But one person even working on themselves can really affect multiple people around them, and can really help them to open up and begin conversations, really, really important conversations. These conversations are healing conversations around mental health, around what people have faced. I often, again, the Black community is not monolithic and is not all the same, but many individuals within the Black community have an idea of what their parents went through, but don't really know the deep story behind it, because they often don't talk about it because they're busy surviving, right? And when an individual really sits down and it's like, what was it really like to have to leave what you know, leave who you know, leave the land that you know, perhaps, and come over here to Canada? What was it really like to go to work during a time when racism was very robust and abundant, and what was it really like? Tell me the stories. Giving even other generations, or generations above us perhaps, a chance to really discuss that can be very profound and quite healing for the entire family.
That's awesome. Again, we are speaking with Crystal Meek, who is the owner of a psychotherapist practice called Therapy Avenue. You can find her at therapyavenue.ca. I just want to take a moment and tell you about some of the other aspects of our campaign, which is looking again at past, present, and future. And we want to let you know that there are some healing circles that we're inviting everyone to. The next healing circle will be on Wednesday, May 25th at 5 p.m. Hosting the circle will be Shireen Ashman and Kofi Morris. Please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for more information, or share your email address when you hear this podcast, and we will connect with you and give you further information. We also want to hear from you. Tell us what you think. What do we as a community need to do to address Black mental health? What are we doing well? What needs to change? Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for more information for our focus group. Our next focus group, our first focus group rather, is going to be on Wednesday, June 29th at 5 p.m. And please check us on social media for further details. So again, really appreciate the time you're spending with us, Crystal. I want to look at now at what is termed a Black Canadian lens. One of the themes that we look at in our podcast series, and also in particular this podcast series, is a Black Canadian lens. Why do you think it is important to have discussions like this using a framework of a Black Canadian lens?
It's absolutely important. A lot of the community, the Black community in Canada, I'll kind of work backwards. So a lot of the Black community in Canada has come from, well, all of us have come from somewhere else eventually, but we bring with us a history, and we bring with us a story, and often we have taken a lot of time within our community to establish ourselves, but we haven't always taken a lot of time to find out, what resources might be available to us within the community for our Black men, for our mental health. Often it's interesting because within the Canadian lens, people look at Canada and they say, "Oh, you have free healthcare. You're lucky," but we don't always have access to free mental health care, especially for long-term care. So we have a lot of acute, systems set up for acute mental health crises, right? So if you're having, an emergency or seemingly emergency, you can go to the hospital always, and get support. But that long-term care to sit and work through, the concerns and the different life struggles that come up is not always available. So it's really important as the Black community, for us to start acknowledging that our mental health is a real priority. In fact, it's more than just a priority, it's health, right? It's just like any other part of our body, our brain needs the support. And if we're not advocating for ourselves, if we're not seeking out, how can we get better supports in this area, we're really doing ourselves an injustice, because healthcare is a right and mental health care is also a right. So it's really important for us as Black Canadians to really prioritize mental health. And if it's not being prioritized in our community or in our province, to start advocating for it and start reaching out to different people in leadership roles, whether it's your MP or MPP or and whatnot, and maybe write a letter to them. It's elections coming up. It's time for us to really prioritize mental health and find out, which parties have mental health as a priority on their platform, because mental health affects our entire body, right? If our mental health is not where it needs to be, and especially if we're having chronic mental health issues, we tend to have a much higher prevalency of chronic health issues. So this is extremely important.
Okay, that's great. Again, I appreciate your time with us. Now, what would you say to the naysayers who believe, why look at it as just a Black Canadian lens? Why isn't it just a Canadian thing? Now, I know you've made some points to this, but I want to really address this because, why be so specific as opposed to just looking at things with mental health? I know you did mention to me before this when we spoke some of the differences in diagnoses when it comes to Black men and especially Black women. How does that play into this? in looking at things through a quote unquote Black Canadian lens.
Absolutely. Yes. There are, everybody's mental health obviously is very important, and we want to help everybody's mental health. But there are specific and unique factors that specifically affect the Black community, and this is because of a history of oppression and a history of racism within Canada, that Canada, doesn't deny, but is trying to work on. But because of this, the systemic concerns that are in our different institutions, such as our health institution, or our school institution, and these different institutions, because they were built under a system of oppression, there's a legacy there that needs to be addressed. And so what ends up happening is if an individual who is Black goes into, let's say, a doctor's office, because their family doctor, again, that in itself is an issue because a lot of people can't find a family doctor. But if you go to your family doctor and you say, hey, I have this list of concerns, there's been a history of sometimes Black individuals or people in Black bodies not being taken the same way as maybe their white counterparts or other individuals. And this is because historically Black bodies have been seen as able to take more stress, or able to take on more pain and these kinds of things. And because of this, sometimes diagnoses have been missed. This also happens within our justice system. And the reason why I talk about these different systems is because if these systems are not balanced properly and working for the Black community, it greatly affects our mental health. I think about when I used to work in the prisons, and I worked in two separate prisons. One was a youth mental health facility for individuals who are deemed criminally not responsible. And in that population, in that facility, there couldn't have been more than 10% Black youth. And then I worked in a Black youth facility that was just a regular correctional facility, like a jail, and it was 95% Black youth. And this is incredibly striking. And what I did see was a lot of those individuals who were in the regular correction facility had mental health issues, but they weren't given, the judge didn't send them there basically. So they weren't given the proper tools, and they weren't sent to the mental health facility where they would have got better support. They would have got treatment. They would have been put on a plan that would have helped them to heal, to get better, right? And to heal their brains. So when you think about the different systems, if they're not set up for us, they really do affect our mental health. So again, it's just so important for us to really advocate, to really use our votes, use our voice, use our everything we have to kind of really send a message via, whether that be a letter or a petition or whatnot, that we really our mental health matters, and it's really important. And when the systems are not set up for us, it really can set us back, mental health wise, generationally, not just even individually. So it's important. It's important for us to reflect on these things and think about, how we can combat them together.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I mean, the what you just mentioned, in basically having people being misdiagnosed. If a young Black man or a woman is incarcerated, but they have mental health issues, they're most certainly not getting the help that they need. Yeah. And I also like the fact that you've mentioned what can be done. This is an election time right now, a provincial election. And yes, I do believe we need to vote. But we also need to hold these politicians feet to the fire,
Yeah,
so to speak.
absolutely.
And this is a time, I think the environment is right for us to be able to speak up, and that they will listen. And not just the party in power, the PCs. We have the NDP, we have the Liberals, we have the Greens.
Yeah.
So I think I completely agree with this step, and I think this is a direction that we want to take with our other podcasts as well, and let everybody know that you aren't an innocent bystander. You can do something, and the fact that you are here, the fact that you are in Canada, the fact that you are paying taxes means that you have these rights, and you are able to advocate. You are able to advocate for yourself. You are able to have a say in what the government, how they treat you and how they take care of you. So, want to also ask you, because we're kind of looking at actions, and we did start off by talking about intergenerational trauma. Now, what are some of the treatments that can help to address this? I can't imagine that it would be something simple or a quick fix, but what can people do to be able to address this issue?
You know, it's funny because it sounds like such a mountain, and often almost most or all of my clients almost will say the hardest thing was reaching out for support. But once they get in, they realize, oh, it's not really a mountain. It's more like a bunch of small hills. It's some steps you can take, right? The first step is acknowledgement. We have to really acknowledge when we are struggling with something, when we are, whether it be anxiety or whether it be depression, whether it be, inappropriate use of drugs or whatever, or alcohol and these kinds of things. Like, we have to really address and acknowledge this stuff. And then once we can acknowledge it, we can really figure out what supports work best for us. There are lots of different treatments. It's very individual based. A lot of people will start off with just Googling, what can I do to help my anxiety? What can I do to help my depression? What things can I do? And they might sound like simple things, but they're not, such as prayer, meditation, journaling, just starting with kind of what we would call in therapy, kind of the basics of just beginning to reflect and giving yourself time and space to really start going through these things and start touching on these things. Reaching out if it feels difficult or not comfortable, reaching out to a professional. I'm really excited to see that so many people in our community are reaching out for support. They're not being shy about it. They're not, kind of trying to like hide and kind of like whisper in secret, hey, I think I have a problem. They're coming out and saying, I think I need help. And that's really encouraging, because that's how you get better. And that's how you heal. We started off with talking about the transgenerational or intergenerational trauma, and it's not something that needs to be continuously passed down. Once this is passed down because it's unresolved. Once it's resolved, it doesn't get passed down anymore. So really giving ourselves the time and space, if possible, to work on these things. Some people will also just go to Indigo and grab a book, like a popular one is Mind Over Mood, and do a workbook on their own. And if they get stuck, then it's time to just reach out to a professional and get some support. There are lots of community groups within community centers, that do group talks around mental health. And and then there's people like me, a psychotherapist, who will sit down with you and make an individual plan of how we're going to work towards your healing. Myself, I work predominantly with trauma, and of course, everything that comes along with it, which might be anxiety, depression, addiction, mental health diseases or concerns. I because of that, I because of that, I'm able to provide treatment plans. And some of the things I do include EMDR, which stands for eye motion desensitization reprocessing, which is a very deep way of getting to the root of things and healing at the root of the problem, as well as brain spotting, which is quite similar. Also talk therapy. And these are ways that we can also work on really beginning the very, very important work of healing ourselves, but not just ourselves, even future generations. In essence, what we've talked about today is so important. Just the acknowledgement of transgenerational issues and traumas. And it really just starts with a conversation. That's where we start. Just opening up the conversation with our
finding somebody to share with, somebody close to you that you feel comfortable to share these thoughts.
Yeah, exactly. So whether that be a family member, whether that be a friend, whether that be a professional, just really starting the conversation, and going from there, and then finding out what next steps work best for you, and that could be, like we talked about, a variety of solutions.
Okay, that's great. I really think it's important, and we want to challenge everyone who's listening to take that first step. Really acknowledge, first of all, that there's something wrong. Do you notice that you have certain habits that may not be safe? Substance abuse. It could be coffee, for example.
For sure.
I like coffee, but I know that because I had a pretty traumatic event in my family. One of my children was quite ill, and those couple of days, I might have had about, when I normally have about 2 cups a day, I had about 6 or 7 cups a day that day.
Boy, were you jittery?
I'm sorry?
Were you jittery?
I wasn't jittery. I just found myself almost in panic mode. And oddly enough, it kind of helped me to just kind of relax and get through the day, because I had doctors coming. Then there's the waiting period because the doctors are busy, and, there just wasn't, there was just a lot of time we were just sitting there. And it was pretty traumatic for me. And I just felt like I was kind of in a mode where I was, I just got to get through this, right? Like I'm not thinking about myself because of being as a parent. I've just got to get through this. So, but to do that, I started getting tired. Let me just down some coffees here. And I did. So, I'm only saying this because, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I thought that was an indication that something was wrong and that I needed to do something and not just brush it off.
I like to call them yellow flags in my practice. Like, those signs that, oh, wait a minute, I'm not acting the way I normally act. Or I'm not behaving the way I normally behave. Let me take a deeper look here at what could be helpful for me.
That's great. And again, we're speaking with Crystal Meek. She owns her own practice, psychotherapy practice called Therapy Avenue. You can reach her at therapyavenue.ca. Now, we're just wrapping up now. We want to just really emphasize to people, we're really hoping that through this campaign that we're doing, past, present, and future perspectives of mental health in the Black community, we want you to really face yourselves and face myself and just start the process. We know that this is something that is happening in the Black community. We know that it is something that is not getting addressed enough, that is being pushed aside. We don't want to just call our uncle mad. We want to ask ourselves what is really wrong, what can be done, and help that person to start that process of acknowledging the issues, not just leaving it. I like to think in our community that it is so important for us to start that first step and reach out to somebody that you know that is close to you and help them to address it. Are there any final words you have for our audience, Crystal?
Yes. I guess the last thing I'll say is, these it can be very hard to take the first step, and going towards the path of healing. It's not always an easy road, but it's a necessary road. But instead of us thinking of it as how am I going to get to the top of that mountain, we can maybe think of it as how am I going to take the first step? What's just the first step? And we'll just start there. And then eventually we'll take the next step. So kind of breaking things down into smaller chunks is what I would suggest when tackling, these concerns for the first time.
That's great. Again, I want to thank you, Crystal, for taking the time to participate in this campaign towards mental health in the Black community, or some people may call it Black mental health. Again, we're going to be doing podcasts from now on until late October, early November. We're also having healing circles. Our healing circles are called Rage, Reflection, and Restoration, Healing Circles for the Soul. Our first healing circle is coming up this next Wednesday, May the 25th at 5 p.m. And it's going to be hosted by Shireen Ashman. She is a tremendous advocate, intellectual, Afrocentric woman. And she just is so powerful with her healing circles. And Kofi Morris, who also is a mental health practitioner, a counselor. He has a book. We're going to be doing some more promotions about him and what he's doing. It's going to be a very, very powerful healing circle coming up May 25th at 5 p.m. Also, please tell us what you think. Make your voice heard on Wednesday, June the 29th at 5 p.m. We will also be having a focus group session where we want to hear what you say. There will be limited spots available. We're giving a $50 gift certificate to the first 20 participants. $50 gift certificate for the first 20 participants. So we really want everyone to benefit from this knowledge, from this interaction, and we hope to see you in our further podcasts, our healing circles, and our focus groups. Crystal, we want to thank you very much for taking the time, and we wish you all the best and continue to support the Black community in what you do.
Thanks so much. It was great having me. Thank you.
All right, and all the best. Take care.
Join our inaugural focus group session on Wednesday, June 29th at 5 p.m. Make your voice heard. Tell us what you think. What do we as a community need to do to address Black mental health? What are we doing well? What needs to change? We want to hear from you.